I want to create a workshop where people are facilitated to learn ways and techniques and practices to walk towards embodying the best version of themselves. And the best version of myself that I ever saw was when I was experiencing my first manic episode, or so it's called. And it went on for about a month before it turned into a super scary psychosis of equal proportions. But the month of mania was really exciting. Everything happened synchronistically. I had some amazing experiences. I was in the present moment. I was very playful, curious, open to people, had lots of different conversations. And I really do feel that even though the state did not last, that it has remained a part of me that would be nice to re-experience. But at the same time, it's not something that I crave. I don't feel like, oh, I have to be that way. But I do feel that it gave me a taste of what's possible for myself. And I have a theory that I can actually move towards embodying that version of myself, or certain aspects, certain traits that I did experience as myself. I could potentially walk towards actually embodying that in daily life if I'm able to practice that in daily life. So instead of maybe feeling bad that I'm not that way, I can find ways to practice being that way. I sort of think of that manic experience as a vision cast on steroids, because I was actually living the vision of myself that I would want to be in daily life. I lived that for a month, and it wasn't sustainable. It was almost like a certain energy came into my life and took over my life for that month. And with that extra energy, I was able to be that way. And it sort of left an imprint on my brain. But now my responsibility is to walk towards being that way in daily life. And I have been able to do that to a certain extent. I feel like mania is almost the universe's energy being expressed through some individuals at certain points in time, almost as a way to really show what it's possible for a human being to experience. And I feel like it's not sustainable and it fizzles out, because reality is actually not designed to foster an individual and nurture an individual that is just that, energetic and happy. And so it's seen at some point by people who are close to the person as something out of character and not normal and pathological. And with that point of view and that perspective, the person is taken into some kind of care and diagnosed with an illness, as opposed to nurtured and cared for and helped. It's not, we see the personality as something so fixed, like this way that we see a person every day is exactly how they are, and nothing can ever change. And so something different is seen as something kind of freaky and scary, when it's not necessarily that way at all. But basically, there's some manic traits that would be nice to be able to embody. Maybe not all of them. Maybe that's where things get a little bit dicey, is that there's too much going on at the same time. And with that change in energy, it's easy for one's life to get out of control really fast, because it's easier to imagine that one will have enough energy and motivation to be involved in every single possibility that comes one's way in the process. There's no real discernment of, yeah, this is something I want to be involved in, and this isn't. Everything is seen as wonderful and magical, and yes, I should do this. But we only have a certain amount that we can really participate in fully. So if I'm able to practice those manic traits and then find what it is that I would like to participate in, and not spread myself too thin, it could be something kind of powerful. And I don't know if that's true, but it's something that I'd like to experiment with. So I've put a little bit of an outline together for this class, and the trouble I have is putting things into a linear fashion, something that is easily communicatable to people. So sometimes I just prefer to yammer on and see what happens. One of the traits that I'd like to embody more is the trait of altruism and giving and generosity. And I need to find out, or as part of the class, it would be, well, what are your gifts? How can you give them? And why aren't you giving them? And those are all good questions that I could probably answer myself and design this course for myself and see if it helps me. Because I'm stuck in this place where I've done a lot of personal development stuff in the past, and it's kind of gotten old. I've personally developed. Now it feels like the next level of development for me is community, or connecting with other people, connecting with something greater than myself. Because just me is kind of boring. And I feel like there's a possible niche with personal development for people with mental health diagnoses, because there is this real want to connect to community and connect to one's altruistic nature, at least in my experience. The traits that people would want to practice embodying would all be different depending on the person and what they've seen for themselves or what they wish for themselves. And part of the personal growth for people with a diagnosis is getting rid of the story that we've been given about what it means to have a mental illness. And I feel like a lot of the trouble is because after a diagnosis, a person is expected to reintegrate into society, when it's possible that the way society is structured is actually one of the factors in how an illness manifested in a person in the first place. So it almost needs a different community and a different society for people with a diagnosis. That's not necessarily completely separate from the normal one, but has different elements that are tailored more to people that have been diagnosed and marginalized. And part of it is creating a story for ourselves of what we think it means to have this happen. And everyone might have a different story, or there could be common themes. And I like to think that the world is a lot more magical than we actually can see, feel, and experience on a daily basis. And in my experience, I've gone into that perception of a magical world that seems to coexist with the reality that we all live in. but it doesn't exist for everyone. The consensus reality is what holds the majority. So the minority that go into different states of consciousness and maybe experience different realities, they become called mentally ill. When I feel like it's possible that we have a lot of different ways of talking about reality and explaining reality that might open up a dialogue to actually co-create a more happy medium between realities that might be experienced in altered states and realities that are experienced by people that are not experiencing those altered states. And by doing that, maybe the continuum of the spectrum of what is considered normal might actually be widened. Because if you imagine that a certain percentage of people that have been diagnosed with a mental health challenge, particularly in psychosis, if there's dialogue around that and there's all these commonalities, well, maybe it's not really that abnormal, it's just something different. And it feels like one day the next sort of campaign for inclusion will be inclusion of everyone's perception of reality, and not necessarily pathologizing it. Maybe being curious, and perhaps by being curious and having dialogue about it, there would be connections created as opposed to divisions, and thus isolating people, which is basically there's no dialogue between the two groups. It's only the people that are so-called normal, the professionals that medicalize and listen for symptoms, but they're not actually listening for common experience, or and there are common experiences, and that's why when the nurses do the intake, they ask questions like, do you hear special messages? Or because there's common experiences that perhaps means something, and maybe if a group of people were gotten together to talk about it, some meaning would be created from it. And a lot of times when there's meaning and validation, then there's a lot more congruence and commonality than we actually think. But if there's no conversation, then how the heck would we know? I feel personally like a lot of people that have been in these different states could probably say a lot of things about reality in order to improve the consensus reality, to move it towards something that actually is more holistic and inclusive. Because if a person goes off into a divergent reality, they're probably experiencing elements of reality that are there, that are just not acknowledged and perceived, or we've lost the sensitivity for, because we're so immersed in entertainment and technology. How many people actually notice the flowers, and the less people that notice, the less people plant them, and the less people that plant them, the less flowers there are, at least in what we see. So there's a lot of things. Me personally, I've experienced that when we cut down a tree and totally disregard nature, we're actually disregarding ourselves big time, and we're actually not disconnected from nature. We're actually nature. We are nature. We're actually looking right at ourselves, and it's looking back at us in its own way. Even by just creating the oxygen we breathe, and then we cut down a tree and we think nothing of it. And there's studies about how, well, there was this one study that I have posted on my wall actually, that planting a tree, I can't remember if it was a tree or 10 trees, but anyway, it increases the well-being of the people on the block, equivalent to a $10,000 raise, $10,000 a year raise. That's probably not exactly the study, but it illustrates that nature has untold benefits, and we already kind of know, but at the same time, we don't, by a lot of our actions and the things that we allow to happen to nature. And another study was how kids spend something like 6 minutes outside a day, and 6 hours looking at a screen of some sort, whether it's TV or an iPhone. And that's just ridiculous. The more our brains are programmed into connecting with a screen, which I'm doing right now, unfortunately, the less it is actually capable of being aware of other things like natural structures. And it's quite scary, actually, that more and more of our reality is actually not real at all. So part of my goal is to go from a competitive world to a fun and playful world. And I've experienced this before in my states. I experienced actually practicing what the Celestine prophecy says about how one day we'll pay each other for insights. So if I give you an insight, you might give me $2, and vice versa. And we'll sort of roam about the world that way. Well, when I was in my manic state a couple of years ago, I decided to play with that because I was manic. So I was like, this is funny, he says. And so when I was at this little, I don't know what it was, a little fair, a wellness fair of some sort, I probably gave somebody some money for an insight, and I kind of winked at them. And then I went to another table and did the same thing, and then somebody gave me money back, and then somebody gave me money, and it was like I totally entered that world for that moment. And that prophecy book is supposed to be somewhat of a prophecy, but basically somebody could be out there living in that world as prophesized by that book, and it could be out there for anyone to go into if they're at that energy level and that resonance. And it's almost like very playful. It's almost like you just kind of know. You look at someone and you know that they're going to know what you're doing. And it was really fun, actually. One of the things I'm quite passionate about is that we really don't know how to take care of ourselves. We're really not doing a good job of that. And in this project, there's certain things that could be gone over that would help people improve their health a little bit. Like fish oil is one of them, and possibly working on one's posture. So if a person that's slouching all the time is not going to feel as good as somebody that is sitting up. And I'm not even sitting up properly because the way this is positioned. But I find it really helpful. This last time I was in the psych ward in particular, I noticed that if I started to slouch, I really felt almost like I was a slouched over homeless person on the street. I really noticed that how I held my body really affected my mental state to the point where I'd almost feel like somebody else in that worse state. It was a dissociation, I guess. So I was consciously trying to sit up properly, and even though I didn't feel like it, I was still going through hell inside, and at least made the hell feel like it was in my head as opposed to I actually was that. So instead of feeling like I was homeless on the street, I felt like a homeless person on the street, but I didn't feel like I was actually there. in somebody else's body almost. That really helped me. So talking a lot about posture and utilizing one's body properly, it could be a way to help people feel a little bit better. And that goes with being able to embody one's mania, visions, dreams, goals. It's pretty hard to be like, yeah, I'm going to be my best self when I'm hunched over like this. I don't think I would recognize myself as my best self, or anyone else would recognize that. And so in daily life, I could practice posture. And there's ways to do that. And also making sure to have dialogue with people, and maybe set up some dialogues where people can talk about their experiences and share their experiences. And not from the perspective of, okay, well, I want this again, and that was so great, or this means I'm great, but from almost like it was a vision or a piece of information to apply to one's daily life. It's like a message. It is kind of like a special message saying, do this, don't do that. And it's subjective, so it's different meaning for everyone, and it might only be valid for a certain point in time. What I'm trying to say is it's not something that is concrete 100% forever. It changes, it's a flux, it's a flow. It's just a source of information, like a reoccurring dream in a way. A quote that I read one time was something about a guy who experienced a lot of altered states of consciousness, and then in speaking with other people about their states, he would say, I don't care about your magical spiritual experience. What I care about is what you do with it afterwards. So it'd be one thing for me to feel like I'm one with God, or like I'm a hero, but then after I crash out of it, out of that altered state, now what do? Do I go and feel like, oh, I wish I felt like I was a hero again? Or do I find how I can be a hero in my daily life, whether it's just smiling at somebody, or helping somebody with a door, or basically turning my eyes outward to see what's actually going on in reality and how I can participate to the best of my ability, instead of just craving that state that I had, like I'm entitled to that all the time. To me, it's like an imprint in the mind that can be moved towards, like an image, like a blueprint. It's basically like having a bit of a map of this other land, this other world that I existed in as my best self. And by moving towards that best version of myself, I might at the same time co-create a little bit of a better world. So the workshop I'm thinking about creating is for people who have experienced mania, so that they can think of themselves differently and create your superhero alter ego or avatar. And it's almost like feeling like I have a light body, or a light version of myself. And light in terms of maybe a holographic image that's sort of walking beside me throughout life, that represents the information that encodes the best version of myself. Maybe sometimes for some reason the universe gives me that energy to pop into that light version of myself and be the best self, but it's kind of like being in a different world. And actually one of the ways that I reconciled coming back from that beautiful world where I was in mania, and then coming back to this world where it's consensus reality. So the people I know and care about, they exist in consensus reality. Now, if I would keep going on in my light body reality, eventually maybe I'd be so disconnected that I would be disconnected from all those people. Plus, I don't know if I would have been able to maintain that anyway. So when I snap back into consensus reality, in a sense, I'm coming back to be with my family and friends. And in that snapback, it appears as if I have developed some kind of mental illness. But in a way, it's the only way that I can come back to reality that everyone is in, is by having a mental illness. And to me, my medications keep me seeing and experiencing consensus reality. Otherwise, I might go off into light body reality, and I don't know if my family exists there. And so I decided to come back and be with my family. And I don't mean I consciously decided that. It's like, okay, you've had your time here, you're going back. But at this, and that's the thing too. To me, the light body reality is sort of going off in isolation by oneself. And to come back is to walk towards that light reality with everyone else, even though they might be moving towards it at a bit of a slower pace. I don't know if any of that makes sense. It doesn't really make sense to me. It's just a different story. It's a different story I can tell myself that to me is more helpful than just that it was all a mental illness. Maybe that's what it is from the vantage point of people who have never been there. But from my vantage point, I have a lot more stories to tell than just I have a diagnosis of a mental illness. That's a very convenient story to tell people that don't have the time or interest or energy into learning about what I went through. And it's convenient for me too in many aspects of daily life. But it's not necessarily the story that is my favorite story. It's one of the stories. And I probably have 10 other stories. So one is that I was diagnosed with a mental illness, very easy to understand. That I went into another world that coexists with today's reality that everyone else is in, and it's actually overlapped with it, and we just can't really see it, but it's there, and we don't normally experience it, though anyone can, through taking a drug or having an organic psychosis or mania, which anyone with a brain could have tomorrow. Nobody's immune to this. And maybe one day people will actually be wishing for it. If it was more understood and supported, I think most people would be like, yeah, I gotta prepare for my possible mania that could happen. I really hope it does. Well, it sounds similar to the grace of God, but I don't know about that one. So basically with the workshop, when mania comes on, a person will have already practiced it in daily life, and so it won't be so foreign. It won't be so different from how a person usually is. So imagine the first time I experienced mania. I'm all happy and I'm just sort of bouncing around in reality, talking to people like a ping pong ball. Now imagine I've practiced manic traits for a couple years, and then when that extra energy comes in, it just means I have extra energy, but I already kind of know how to utilize that energy and have practiced on how to be. So I haven't been sitting here waiting for mania like this, and then all of a sudden it comes and I'm like, whoa! It's more, I'm already like that in daily life. Now I have a bit more insight, energy, and I practice ways that now when it comes, I can actually utilize that energy and harvest the things that come out of it instead of it being a waste, instead of it being just for me a selfish thing. I feel like that energy is really to connect and share with other people. Another example would be, say I created some kind of structure. Imagine I create my Instagram, my YouTube, my LinkedIn, all that stuff, and then poof, I have mania. All of a sudden, I'm able to funnel all of that insight into those channels. And maybe some of it's crap, but maybe some of it's good. Or maybe also I can at least see where the stuff might go or be useful. So after I've come down from some of that energy, I can put it into play. Put some of the stuff that I wrote or whatever into play. Perhaps one day people who are manic will connect when they're manic somehow and really co-create projects. Actually, if there was a company that was created to harvest the mania of people and actually discern the truth from the crap, which there is some, it's more like the energy erupts and the person is just the energy and they're not in their discerning, choosing ego mind. It's just sort of everything's coming through, and then eventually it usually leads to behaviors that are seen as like, what the heck? And then a person is hospitalized, and then it's all a big waste. But as part of this workshop program, a person would be taught how to harvest their mania and their insights, and also there would probably be an app created to help somebody harvest their mania and psychosis. And what that means, it's almost like a vision casting period for one's life. The world needs our gifts, and maybe some people are gifted in that they can play a musical instrument and perform on a daily or weekly basis. And it's very consistent. And maybe some people just have one mania where they have the most incredible, insightful, innovative idea that gets harvested because somebody cared to notice that energy that comes. Some people practice a skill and they master it. Some people just get a shot of energy, and it could be possible that the universe is trying to tell us. It might be trying to send us messages through messenger people with certain insights and innovations that could help the world. And then, but the person is sort of like the messenger is shot, sometimes with a needle, to calm them down. But it's very intense, and I think it's an untapped resource. One day people will harvest people in a very nice way. They will see that a person has had a vision or something,